before you assume this is just another video telling you that you're too sensitive for this world, stop. Because that's exactly the lie that's been keeping you stuck. The truth is so much more specific than that. And by the time this video ends, you're going to understand something about yourself that most people, including the people closest to you, have never been able to explain. Not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't feel what you feel. They never could. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Most people who watch a video like this already know, somewhere deep inside, that they are different. Not broken, not dramatic, not too much. Different in the way that a person with perfect pitch is different. They hear things others don't. They notice things others walk right past. And that gift, that exact same gift, is also the reason the room feels exhausting before anyone has even said a word. You walk in, you smile, you do everything right, and still, something in your chest tightens. Something in your stomach drops a little. And you don't know why, because on the surface everything looks fine. The people are nice, the music is good, nobody is fighting. But you're already holding the entire room. You are already tracking the couple in the corner who smiled too fast, the friend who laughed just a little too loud, the person by the door who keeps checking their phone because they don't want to be here either. You noticed all of that before you even sat down. And nobody noticed you noticing. That is not anxiety, that is not a disorder, that is a nervous system that was trained, at some point, maybe very early in your life, to read people the way other people read words, fluently, automatically, without choice. And here is where most videos get it wrong. They tell you that empaths struggle socially because they care too much. But caring too much is not the problem. The problem is that no one ever told you that absorbing other people's emotional weather was supposed to be optional. You thought it was just what being in a room with people felt like. You thought everyone felt this way. They don't. So when people ask you, why don't you have more friends? Why do you keep to yourself? Why don't you come out more? There is this pause, this internal translation that happens where you're trying to convert something that lives in your body into words that will make sense to someone who has never felt it. And you usually end up saying something like, I'm just tired, or I'm more of an introvert. And they nod, and they don't understand. And you go home and sit in the quiet and feel, for the first time all day, like you can breathe. That moment, that exhale when you are finally alone, that is not loneliness, that is recovery. But here is the thing nobody talks about. Recovery is not the same as not wanting connection. And this is the most important distinction in this entire video. So stay with me. Empaths with few or no friends are not people who don't need love. They are people who have learned, sometimes painfully, sometimes slowly, sometimes through friendships that cost them more than they can describe, that the wrong kind of connection is more draining than being alone. And so they choose alone. Not because they want to, because it hurts less. And that choice, that self-protective withdrawal, gets mistaken for coldness, for arrogance, for being hard to reach, when actually the empath is sitting at home thinking, I would love a real friend. I just don't know where to find one who doesn't need me to perform. Here's the first thing empaths with few or no friends usually have. And it is not a flaw. It is a feature that nobody gave them the manual for. They have a body that keeps the score of every interaction, not metaphorically, physically. After a gathering, their shoulders are up near their ears without them realizing it. Their jaw is tight. Their stomach is still processing something someone said 3 hours ago that sounded fine on the surface but felt off underneath. Their system is still working, still reviewing, still filing away small signals that most people's nervous systems simply don't register. This is why the empath can go to a perfectly pleasant dinner and come home feeling like they ran a marathon. Nothing bad happened. Everyone was kind. There was good food and easy conversation. But the empath was managing an invisible workload the entire time, reading tone shifts, adjusting their energy to match the room, monitoring for tension, suppressing reactions that would seem too much to the people around them. And when you do that, when you carry that invisible weight every single time you're around other people, your brain starts doing a very reasonable, very logical thing. It starts associating people with effort. It starts treating social situations not as sources of energy, but as energy expenditures. And slowly, quietly, without any dramatic decision being made, you start showing up less, initiating less, accepting fewer invitations. And your social world gets smaller, not because you failed at friendship, but because your nervous system did the math and decided that the cost was too high for what you were getting back. The tragedy is not that empaths end up with few friends. The tragedy is that nobody ever explained to them why. Nobody ever sat them down and said, hey, the way you experience being around people is fundamentally different from how most people experience it. And different doesn't mean wrong. It means you need a different kind of connection, not more connection. Safer connection. And that word, safe, is goy, NG, to come back again and again in this video. Because for an empath, safety is not a bonus feature in a friendship. It is the entry requirement. Without it, no amount of effort, no amount of good intentions, no amount of history makes a relationship feel real. So, if you have few or no friends right now, I want you to hear this one thing before we go any further. You are not failing at life. You are responding to your life. And there is a difference that changes everything. Now let's talk about something that goes even deeper. Because the first trait explains why socializing is exhausting. But this next one explains why even when you do find people, even when you try, even when you show up, even when you give it a real chance, you still end up feeling alone in the room. And this one is the trait that most empaths carry the longest, without ever naming it. Empaths with few or no friends are almost never lonely because of a lack of people. They are lonely because of a lack of honesty. And those are two completely different problems with two completely different solutions. Think about the last time you were in a group conversation and you felt that specific quiet kind of emptiness. Not sadness exactly, more like disconnection. Like you were watching the conversation from behind glass. Everyone was talking, everyone was laughing, and you were there nodding, responding at the right moments, performing the right expressions. But inside something was flat, something was absent, and you left that gathering feeling more alone than you did before you arrived. That feeling has a name. It is called the performance gap, the distance between who you actually are and who you are pretending to be in order to fit into a social situation that does not feel real to you. And for empaths, that gap is enormous. Because empaths cannot do fake, not sustainably. They can perform it for an hour, maybe two. They can smile through small talk and laugh at jokes that don't land and pretend that surface level conversation is satisfying. But their body knows the difference. And after a while, the body starts sending a very clear signal. This is not nourishing me. This is costing me, and I need to leave. This is why empaths develop what looks like social avoidance, but is actually something much more specific. It is not that they are avoiding people. They are avoiding inauthenticity. They are avoiding the version of themselves they have to become in order to survive spaces that were not built for the kind of depth they carry. And here is the contrast that most people never see. Put that same empath in a one-on-one conversation with someone who is genuinely open, someone who asks a real question and waits for a real answer, someone who shares something honest without packaging it to seem impressive, someone who lets there be silence without panicking and filling it with noise. And that empath will open like a window on the first warm day of spring. They will talk for hours. They will feel more alive in that one conversation than they did in 6 months of parties and group chats, because they are finally in a space where they don't have to pretend. This is the second thing empaths with few or no friends usually have. A threshold for inauthenticity that is so low, most social environments cannot clear it, and they have usually spent years blaming themselves for that threshold, telling themselves they are too picky, too intense, too idealistic about what friendship is supposed to feel like, when actually, the threshold is not a character flaw. It is a form of intelligence. The empath system knows, at a cellular level, the difference between a conversation that is real and a conversation that is just noise, dressed up in the costume of connection. But here is where it gets complicated. Because that same intelligence, that same sensitivity to inauthenticity can become a trap when you have been burned enough times, When you have opened up to people who weren't ready, shared with people who didn't know how to hold what you gave them, trusted people who used your softness against you. Your system does something that feels like wisdom but can quietly become a wall. It starts pre-screening everyone. Before a friendship even has a chance to develop, the empath is already running a silent audit. Is this person real? Are they performing? Is that laugh genuine? Is this interest in me actual curiosity or just social reflex? And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that audit is so rigorous that real people with genuine intentions can't pass it. Not because they aren't safe, but because the empath system has been on high alert for so long that it can no longer fully distinguish between danger and indifference. This is not a character failure. It is a wound wearing the mask of protection. And it matters to name it clearly because the solution is not to lower your standards. The solution is to understand the difference between your instincts and your fear. Your instincts are fast and quiet, and they usually turn out to be right. Your fear is loud and exhausting, and it treats every new person like a repeat of the worst person you ever trusted. Learning to tell those two things apart, that is some of the most important inner work an empath can do. Because the goal is not to become someone who trusts everyone. The goal is to become someone who can stay open long enough to let the right people prove themselves. And there is a profound difference between the two. There is also something else here that deserves to be said plainly. A lot of empaths, not all, but many, grew up in environments where authenticity was not safe, where say I and gee how you really felt led to punishment, dismissal, ridicule, or withdrawal of love. Where you learned very early that the version of you that was acceptable was the edited version, the pleasant one, the agreeable one, the one who didn't make things difficult. And when you grow up editing yourself for survival, you carry that editing into every relationship you form as an adult, not because you want to be inauthentic, but because authenticity was once genuinely dangerous, and your body has not yet received the update that says, it is safe now, you can put the mask down. So you end up in this painful cycle. You crave real connection. You cannot tolerate fake connection. But you are also terrified of the real connection you crave, because every time you have shown up fully, something has gone wrong. So you hover at the edge of relationships, never quite all the way in, never quite all the way out. Close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to survive if the fire goes out. And people look at you from the outside and they say, you seem so hard to get close to. And you want to say, no, I am desperate to be close to someone. I just need to know it is safe first. And I have not felt safe in a very long time. There is a moment that almost every empath knows. It does not happen dramatically. There is no argument, no big falling out, no single event you can point to and say, that is where it ended. Instead, it happens quietly, gradually. Like a light that dims so slowly you don't notice until the room is almost dark. One day you realize you have stopped texting someone back as quickly. You have stopped initiating. You have stopped showing up. Not physically, but in the way that matters. The part of you that was genuinely present in that relationship has quietly packed its things and left, and the other person often has no idea, because from the outside, nothing obvious changed, but from the inside everything did. This is the third thing empaths with few or no friends usually have, and it is the one that confuses people the most, including the empath themselves. They do not end relationships loudly. They end them in silence. They disappear, and the world calls it ghosting. But what it actually is the last boundary of a person who was never taught that they were allowed to have boundaries at all. Here is how it happens. The empath tolerates. That is the first step, and it is important to understand why. They tolerate not because they are weak, but because they are wired to understand. They can feel the other person's insecurity behind the unkind comment. They can sense the fear underneath the controlling behavior. They can see the wound inside the person causing the wound. And because they can see it, they make excuses for it. They rationalize. They tell themselves, they didn't mean it that way. They're going through something hard. I'm probably being too sensitive. I should give them another chance. And they do. They give another chance. And another. And another. Until one day, without any announcement, Without any final confrontation, the chances run out, not with anger, with exhaustion. And this is where the empath goes silent. They stop responding with the same warmth. They create small distances. They become busy in ways that are technically true but strategically timed, and the relationship fades, and the other person is left confused, saying, "I don't understand what happened. We were fine." And the empath is sitting somewhere quiet thinking, "We were never fine. I was just still trying." This pattern, this slow, silent withdrawal, is not a character flaw. It is the coping mechanism of someone who was never given permission to say directly, "This is hurting me and I need it to stop." Because often, empaths grew up in environments where direct communication about pain was either ignored or punished, where saying "that hurt me" led to being told you were too sensitive, where setting a boundary led to being accused of being selfish, where your emotional reality was consistently treated as an inconvenience rather than a truth worth hearing. And so you learned, not consciously but deeply, that the only safe way to protect yourself was to disappear, not to confront, not to demand, just to quietly become less available until the relationship dissolved on its own. The cost of this pattern is enormous, and it works in two directions. First, it means the empath ends up losing relationships that might have been salvageable if they had been able to say, early on, "This specific thing is not working for me." Sometimes people genuinely do not know they are causing harm. Sometimes one honest conversation would have changed everything. But the empath system, trained by old pain, skips that step entirely and goes straight to withdrawal. And the potential friendship never becomes what it could have been. Second, and this is the part that cuts deeper, it means the empath carries a private grief for every relationship they have ever quietly ended. Because they did not want to leave. They wanted things to be different. They wanted to be able to stay. They just did not know how to stay and be honest at the same time. And so they chose the only exit they knew. And they grieve that exit in private, while the other person sometimes doesn't even know a loss occurred. This is why so many empaths describe their social history as a series of connections that almost became real. Almost. That word, that almost, is the signature of someone who kept getting close to the edge of genuine intimacy and then stepping back at the last moment. Not because they didn't want it, but because wanting it and trusting it at the same time felt like too much to hold. Now here is the piece of this that changes things. The disappearing is not the problem. The disappearing is the symptom. The real issue is that somewhere along the way, the empath absorbed the belief so quietly that they never even heard it arrive. The belief that their needs, their actual needs, not their performance, not their helpfulness, not their presence, but their needs were too much, were a burden, were the thing that would drive people away if ever fully revealed, and so they hid them masterfully. They became the person who was always fine, always available, always the one asking how you were doing and genuinely meaning it. They became so skilled at giving that they forgot, or were never taught, how to receive. And a friendship where one person only gives and the other only takes is not a friendship. It is a dynamic. And dynamics, no matter how comfortable they feel, always end, because the person giving has a limit. And when they reach it, they do not explode. They evaporate. If you recognize this in yourself, if you have a trail of quietly ended relationships behind you, connections that faded not because of a fight, but because of a slow and silent retreat, I want you to understand something that might be the most important sentence in this entire video. You did not fail those friendships. You survived them the only way you knew how, with the tools you had at the time. And the work now is not to punish yourself for the relationships you couldn't save. The work is to build one new skill that changes everything going forward. The skill of small, early honesty, not big confrontations, not dramatic declarations. Just small, early, honest signals. A gentle, "that comment stung a little." A quiet, "I need some space today." A simple, "I'm not okay and I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to know." These are not way-nesses. They are the things that let relationships breathe. They are the things that give connection a fighting chance. And they are the things that, for most empaths, feel terrifying right up until the moment they work. So we have arrived at the part of this video that most people skip to, the part where someone tells you what to do, how to fix it, how to finally crack the code on connection and stop ending up alone. And I am going to give you something practical, I promise. But I need to say one thing first, because if you skip this part, the practical advice won't land. It will just be another list of things you already know, but can't seem to make yourself do. And you deserve better than that. The reason practical advice rarely works for empaths is not because empaths are resistant to growth. It is because most advice is built for a nervous system that is not theirs. It assumes that the barrier to connection is simply a lack of social skill. That if you just put yourself out there more, say yes to more invitations, download the right app, join the right community, the loneliness will resolve itself. And for some people, that is true. For empaths, it is almost never true, because the barrier is not social. It is physiological. It lives in the body, and until you address it there, every social strategy you try will feel like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. Technically possible, practically exhausting, and never quite right. So before the practical steps, here is the reframe that makes all of them possible. Your nervous system is not broken. It is calibrated. It was calibrated by your history, by the rooms you grew up in, the people who shaped your early understanding of what closeness feels like, the moments when being fully yourself was met with rejection, dismissal, or silence. And a calibrated system is not a fixed system. Calibration can be adjusted, not overnight, not through willpower alone, but gradually, gently, through new experiences that slowly teach your body what your mind already knows. That not everyone is a threat, that not every open door leads to pain. That safety, real safety, does exist. You just have not found enough of it yet to trust it completely. And that is not your fault. That is your history. There is a difference. Now here is the first practical thing, and it is smaller than you expect. Stop measuring the success of a social interaction by how much energy it cost you afterward. That metric was never fair to you. A better question, the question that actually tells you something useful, is this. After spending time with this person, did I feel more like myself or less? Not more impressive, not more liked, not more entertaining, more like yourself. That is the only variable that matters, because safe people, truly safe people, do not require you to shrink, perform, manage, or edit in order to be accepted. They make you feel more settled in your own skin, not less. And when you start using that as your compass instead of, did I say the right things, or did they seem to like me, you will start noticing very quickly which connections are worth pursuing and which ones are costing you more than they are giving back. The second practical thing is this. Practice what can only be called graduated honesty, not radical vulnerability, not immediate deep disclosure, just small incremental moments of truth dropped into conversation like stones into still water, and then watching what happens to the surface. Tell someone you are having a hard week. Mention that a certain kind of humor doesn't sit well with you. Admit that you are an introvert and large groups drain you. These are not confessions, they are tests. And the results are immediate and deeply informative. Safe people will respond with curiosity, with softness, with accommodation. Unsafe people will make you feel dramatic, will minimize, will pivot back to themselves, will make a joke at your expense and watch to see if you take it. And now you know, without weeks of analysis, without lying awake wondering if you can trust them. The small honesty told you everything you needed to know. The third thing, and this one is for the empaths who have been alone for a long time and have started to wonder if something is fundamentally wrong with them, is simply this. Loneliness that comes from refusing to betray yourself is not the same as loneliness that comes from being unwanted. Read that again. Because those two experiences can feel identical from the inside. The ache is the same. The quiet is the same. The Friday nights that stretch too long are the same. But their meaning is completely different. One is evidence of rejection. The other is evidence of integrity. And if you have been sitting alone not because no one wanted you, but because you refused to perform a version of yourself that felt hollow just to avoid the silence, that is not failure. That is one of the most quietly courageous things a person can do, and it deserves to be honored as such, not punished with shame. Here is what I want you to take from this video. Not a checklist, not a strategy, just one shift in the story you tell yourself about your social life. The story most empaths are carrying sounds something like this. I am too much for people. I am too sensitive. I want too much from connection. I keep ending up alone because something about me drives people away. And that story is not only untrue, it is the exact inversion of the truth. Because the reality is this: you are not too much. You have simply been in too many spaces that were too small for what you carry.